I'm very happy that we've managed to get together at last. And 2025 seems already quite a rock and roll year. There's so much happening between the US and today I'm in the UK, I'm in London, but I'll be on US side next week. Yeah, for most of the quarter, but so much happening already that I almost need a new holiday just to absorb and figure out how that impacts things. But I wanted to do this for a long time because clearly there is our mission of helping a new generation of scientists figure out their career path and understanding what is the best way of putting their skills to use. Is our big mission at Will Be. And you mentioned Shamit, so you have been working with Apoha, a company that I've had the pleasure to build with you and with Shamit and with Ashika and Dee as well, and collaborating on that front. But it's not often that whoever is in academia is able to hear what it's like outside of academia while still carrying out a scientific role. And your role is within a company. We could call it startup. It's still, I imagine, as innovative as an early stage startup, but you're not quite at that stage anymore. You've been growing the company. So just so that we are all on the same page and whoever will be watching this can understand what's your point of view. How did you progress from being in academia and then going into industry and then joining Mythic Therapeutics, which is one of the leaders in terms of growth within the Boston area in biotech? How did you join the company, and what is your role? We can get then into what is your role today and what will be in the future, but just to understand the initial phases would be great.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me and letting me talk about my journey in science and all the way to Mythic. So I guess if I go way back when I was in academia doing my PhD work, I went to North Carolina State University where I did my PhD in chemical and biomolecular engineering. I was always a protein engineer at heart. So that's what my PhD work was in. But as I was nearing towards the end of my PhD time, I was grappling with this question about whether I want to stay in academia or I want to go into industry. I very much like the basic science world. I also really like actually teaching. That's something I really like. I still continue to do that in some capacity, which we can talk about later. So I was torn between whether I want to be in academia or going to industry. So I think one thing that really changed my perspective there was that I got an opportunity to do an internship at Genentech in the final year of my PhD. And this is in their antibody engineering department. This is the first time where I'm now working at a company that is developing medicines for patients. And I think the whole mission of working towards generating something that can help patients really resonated with me. So when I was there, I realized that, of course, I love the science, but at the same time, I can align that work very well with generating something that can actually help people. And I'm a people person. I really like helping people, whether it's in the capacity of managing them or people as patients or people as my family and friends around me. I think that really helped me understand that I want to be involved in the translational part of research.
Was this something offered by the university, or you saw this opportunity? You went, I want to see what it's like. Let me see if there's a role for me.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And again, I would say I'm very grateful to my PhD advisor at the time because it was very uncommon for PhD students to do internships. Because typically you're paid by your advisor. So for the summer, if you're in the lab, you're like your final year PhD student is the golden hen. They can do a lot of work. And I think he was very gracious to allow me to actually explore this and try to figure out what I want to do for my career. So that was an exception at the time at the university. And I think since a lot of people have done it because I keep recommending people to do it. So a lot of people back at...
That was what, 3 years ago, 30 years ago?
To date me, probably it was 13 years ago.
I see.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you hadn't finished your PhD quite yet?
No.
And then you spent, what do you think how long was the period?
So it was about 3.5 months. It was not super long. It was over the summer. But I certainly think as I came back, and my advisor told me this as well, my perspective at looking at data and analyzing science changed a lot. And I think it really helped me wrap up my work at the end because I think critical thinking is something that I really grew on when I was in that internship. So I was really looking at my work as a peer reviewer, and that really helped me solidify the research that I was doing and wrap up things towards the end of my graduate school work.
I see. And just so Genentech for you was a company that you knew much about at the time? Had you worked with them academically at all? Or it was, I've heard of the name, they've got brand equity, and then day one was just like, wow, this is all new.
Yes, of course. I had looked at the research that they had done. Of course, there were papers. Genentech publishes quite prolifically, so you can see a lot of work from the company. I'd read the papers. I know that they were doing a lot of cutting edge science. They were the leaders in antibodies at the time, and a couple of the drugs that they had made were already on the market, especially in the biologics space, which is where I wanted to be. Yeah, and again, as I was applying, I was looking at all of those things: brand equity, what would look good on my resume, and how that sort of aligns with what I want to do.
I see. That happened, and then you came back. You had to finish your PhD.
Yes,
that happened.
Yes. I think I did that. And then as I was wrapping up, I made up my mind that I was going to go into industry. And I started looking at industry positions. I think one other thing that I also realized while the experience at Genentech was amazing, I realized that I'm probably better suited for a smaller size company because I like to be doing a lot of different things and wear a lot of different hats. So for context, actually, I was the first student of my PhD advisor. So I helped him set up his lab, and I set up all the protocols in the lab and trained people and all of that. So I really enjoyed that. And I think Genentech is a great training ground for learning drug development. And I think that was great. But I knew that I wanted to do many different things. When I was looking for a position, I came across this small company in New Jersey called OncoBiologics. And this company was primarily a biosimilars company, but they wanted to establish their innovative medicines arm. And this is where I came in. They hired me as a senior scientist in their discovery sciences group. Again, very similar to what I'd done in my PhD. I had to go in, set up the lab, set up all the protocols, and start developing their platform from scratch. So that's what
in a venture context, was this like a startup run, like venture backed?
It was. I think it was a unique situation because it was venture backed, but they also had funding through other routes, and I can't remember at the time now what it was, but they were getting some. They knew they could monetize on the biosimilar side, and they wanted to use that to fund the innovative medicine side. So they were strategically starting to think about innovative medicine so that it lines up with when they have revenue, they could put more money into the innovative side.
Were you recruited in, or you found it on a school board, or?
So it's a funny story. This is back again in 2011, 12 days. LinkedIn was very new. I actually just cold messaged the CEO of the company. And he put me in touch with their head of research. And then we started talking. Turned out they had a position, which was for a higher level role, but they interviewed me, they liked me, and they offered me the job. So it was through LinkedIn. There wasn't a role posted on a website.
Yeah.
But I just reached out and they hired me.
That pays off, right?
Yeah.
Is that common in academia, reaching out to, if you like, an employer? That in academia it would be, I don't know, a lab group leader and saying, can I come and work for you? Or is it more like process oriented, where you just have to wait until something pops up and then you apply and then you follow the process of recruitment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it depends on what you're looking for. So like I said earlier, I was looking to work for a small company. Yeah. And as I had interacted with people in my network and also at conferences, what I'd realized that in smaller companies, sometimes it's hard to define a role because people are doing so many different things. But they may have a need. So if you reach out and if they feel like you could contribute to the company in some meaningful way, there are opportunities where roles could be created. Yeah. And I think that's what happened with me at the time. So for a small company, very much, I think I took that approach when I was job searching at the time to reaching out to people on LinkedIn and, trying to understand from them about the role of the company and see what they're doing and whether it would align with my interests. For larger companies, typically you have roles that are posted. I think it's always a good idea still there if you know someone internally to connect with them. But I guess my understanding there is that those roles are probably more defined than roles in a smaller company are.
Yeah. It's crazy that we've been doing this now for close to 5 years. And when we started, LinkedIn was really rare among scientists, especially in Europe, I would say. So that would be 2020. So you did this in 2013. And I imagine in the scientific community, 12, exactly. So within the scientific community, that was quite rare, at least in academia. But it's incredible that how even today, we still have plenty of academics that are reaching out saying, I would like some help or support or get involved in the community because I'm looking for answers about my career, or I want to join a startup, I want to start up. And they're yet not aware or have not created a profile on LinkedIn, which is, it may be seen as a way of basically perhaps flaunting your curriculum, but really it's free intelligence. It's an incredible repository of who's who, what stage they're at, how much money do they have, and what are they pursuing, and all of that. So it's a great signal that this has happened for you, because I'm sure the community will appreciate hearing that it has worked for you in that way.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the aspect of a small team that may not have a specific role for you, but they certainly have a need, right? So they're always like all hands on deck, get stuck in. And I relate with that because in any enterprise, I can see how really at times when you're small, you're not really recruiting for specific excellency in a domain, but you're actually looking for the person that has the best character in terms of coming in and proposing themselves to go, I'm interested in what you're doing. How can I help? And that's really the magic in very small organizations.
Yeah.
Is that still the case? Is that what happened? After that, did you end up because you were recruited out of that company, or?
Yeah, so yes, I was. And I think LinkedIn played a role there as well. So funny enough, I was at this company for about a year, and I actually got a call on my work phone from a recruiter talking to me about a position at Alexion. And I was like, how did you find me? And I saw your profile on LinkedIn.
There you go.
And apparently what they had done was, and they called the company main line to connect to me. So because I didn't have my phone number on LinkedIn, I was actually quite scared when I heard that call. I was like, okay, you should call me on my personal phone. This is not, I don't want to do this on a company phone. But they mentioned about this role at Alexion, which is a much larger company. At that time, it was about 3,000 people. And it was in their molecular sciences team, which was, again, similar to things that I'd done around protein engineering, but maybe more at a slightly larger company. They also had some aspects of coming up with new projects and new targets and things like that that really resonated with me. But again, like I mentioned earlier, at heart, I knew I liked working for a small company. But then I actually took that call and spoke to the hiring manager and learned about the role. And I think what I realized at that time is, yes, a small company environment is what I enjoy, but I don't have any experience in drug development yet, right? And the only way to get it is to actually do it. The small company that I was at was great and I was learning a lot, but it'll take a while for that company to get there.
Yeah.
And if I take this role, I can learn from a lot of people around me that have been doing that for years at a company that is very successful and has multiple products on the market already.
Yeah.
So I think that, and particularly the hiring manager, I really felt like he was a great mentor, and I really liked it. Interestingly, though, and this is maybe getting into too much information, they also had a role which was higher level than what I was available for. And they basically talked to me and then didn't reach out to me for about the next month or so. The recruiter told me the hiring manager thought that you were too junior for the role. So I brushed it off and I forgot about it. And then a month and a half later, I got a call again from the recruiter that they want to bring me on site. So I went there and they liked me. They offered me a position and I joined. I found out they had actually created a position for me because that position that I'd interviewed for initially was still open and they hired someone next year. But they'd created a new position and that's why I'd taken the time. And it was very motivating to learn that the company also felt like I could contribute in meaningful ways. So when I went to Alexion, I got to learn more broadly about the drug development process, all the way from how you nominate a project, how you take it along, how you vet the different aspects of the project to see whether the molecules that you're working with can qualify to be a drug and have drug-like properties, and then eventually get to a point where you're generating data and information that can be filed for an FDA submission. So I think I saw that gamut all the way from the initiation of the project to submission to the FDA, which was very rewarding. At the same time, I also got an opportunity to do people management, to also manage teams, to work cross-functionally with many different departments, which I may not have gotten to work at a smaller company at the time because they didn't have that many departments. I just got a lot of exposure all around for how to develop a drug and take it all the way to FDA submission.
Wow. It sounds like a pivotal piece of experience. You want to set up a shop, set up a startup. But by then, had you developed a founder bug, an entrepreneurship interest, or?
Yeah, I was always interested in that. But I'd never been in a situation where I had to be involved in any sort of fundraising or very early on where you're pitching your ideas to someone. Of course, I'd been in meetings at Alexion where you're pitching a new project idea, but that's very different than pitching a whole company. But I was always very curious and very interested in that aspect. That's when I think I was at Alexion about 4 years. And
still in New York. So the first startup was in New York. I think Alexion was also in New York.
Well, Alexion was in Connecticut. So I was in New Jersey. I'd moved to Connecticut.
Okay.
And then I was in Connecticut. And then after that, after staying at Alexion for about 4 years, I'd seen the whole life cycle of a project going all the way and to almost getting very close to the IND submission. I wasn't there for the IND submission of the exact project, but that project is still in phase 3 trials. So that's still ongoing and helping patients, and that's great. But then I started thinking a little bit around what my next thing should be, and LinkedIn comes in again. So I basically, at that time, I was talking to my network, and they were telling me a lot of different things, and talking to people in Boston as well, because it's close by. There's a lot more opportunities compared to Connecticut. And I was open to moving. So that wasn't an issue at all. So someone in my network told me about a position at a small company that was available because the offer wasn't accepted by another person. And I basically, long story short, I really was looking around. I searched for people that might be at the company, whatnot, and looked up on LinkedIn, and I found my current manager on LinkedIn that I reached out to. And I was like, I am looking and I want to know more about the role and whatnot. And I get on a call with Brian. I think we've been at this meeting before. And he tells me about that, hey, I'm looking to start this small company. And are you interested? And of course, we talk a lot. And Brian had been at Flagship before and started companies before. And this is the experience that I don't have, right? I've done science, but I now see someone who has the experience on the other side, raising funds and build companies that they've done before. And I talked to him. He brought in his other business co-founder, Alex, and I spoke to both of them over the phone. They asked me to come over to Boston to just meet them, and I did that. I signed a CDA. They talked to me about the ideas that they were thinking, and then they told me to go back, and if I was at Mythic, we were called something else at the time, but if I was at Mythic, how would I do it? So I went back and came back in 2 weeks with a research plan, and I presented it to them, and they apparently liked it because 2 days later they offered me a job. Now I basically moved all the way from Connecticut to Boston to join a 2-person company. We didn't have a lab. We had a small office in One Broadway in Cambridge, where a lot of startups have that as their address in the CIC building. And I come in and basically start thinking about how we are going to do what we think we want to do.
Wow. So if I remember right, the first round that Brian did was a bunch of angels
Yes.
that were hanging around Flagship. And
Yep.
so was that already closed and they were?
So the angel round was, I think, just closed when I came in. So I started talking to them in June of 2017, I think. And then I didn't formally come in until October 2017. So we've been talking in between because I had to move and all that. And yeah, I think the angel round was already closed and they had secured a bench in a lab space in Natick. So we knew that we have a spot. And then we just had to get some lab work done and get ready to generate some data so we can do a seed round.
It's almost like coming full circle because you had started working with your supervisor, setting up the lab and seeing the beginning of that. And then, and then you saw the end product at Genentech, because if you like, that's the end of the life cycle of a venture. And then went to the ground floor of a company with a startup. I went the first one. And then seeing the process, which I guess that was the pivotal piece of experience that Mythic was looking for in looking for somebody like you, right? And so that was it was a small company. So it was the three of you at that time. So you had to go through the process of recruiting your own team in the lab, and then maybe setting up the lab. So even the infrastructure of that and setting up the milestones to achieve whatever timeline in preparation for the next round. And how was that process? Because one thing is to work for somebody that has leadership and then tells you how to with that. And another thing is taking the responsibility of even understanding what are the business requirements and then translating them in science strategy. Yeah,
that's a pretty big question. And I can try to parse it out and explain in different ways. I also have to try to remember how smart I was at that time to do a lot of those things. So I would say, I think I do have to thank Brian for this, because Brian's also a scientist himself, right? So that really helped, because we could talk about ideas a lot, and they had certain ideas that they had thought about, but then to execute them, we had to figure out what would it take to really execute these within the time frame that we had and with the resources that we had. So I think we had to make some tweaks to the plans that we came up with. In order to set up the lab, I think because I'd done setting up labs before twice, that wasn't as daunting to me. I was easily able to reach out to vendors. I actually had some connections that I'd made down in North Carolina, and these companies had reps all the way on the East Coast. So I could reach out to the same reps and they could connect me with people in the Boston area. So that really helped in setting up the lab. The space we were in was a small incubator, so there were other startups in there. So I was able to get some help with them from time to time if I needed something small or needed to grow. So the place had what we needed at the time from a resource perspective in the lab. We had to buy some things, but most importantly, we had to work on the ideas and figure out what we really want to execute within this time frame. So we had pretty regular communication, Brian and I, and also Alex at the time. We would meet every Friday and discuss where we are going, and then plan out for what we were going to do the next week. That was also the time when I was doing the lab work myself, because I didn't have a team at that time. Slowly, then we recruited our first person, I think. So I joined in October, started the lab in like December, and recruited our first person in March, who came in to do a lot of the cell biology work for us. I was mostly doing the protein engineering work. So I would make molecules that they can test in the cancer cells and figure out how those were working. So we did that, and I think we collected some data, of course, very early data, coming very early into our process. And I think I was pretty much not involved at all in the fundraising part at the time, because Mythic is unique in the sense that some startups, they usually spin out of academia, or there's like a technology that they already have that they want to work on. In our case, we were going to build our own technology. So we wanted someone to be focused on building that technology full time because we didn't have anything, right?
Yeah.
So I was basically pretty much in the lab. I wasn't that involved in the fundraising piece at that time at all. I would help with preparing slide decks and whatnot, but I wasn't in any of the meetings early on. So we raised, I think, our seed round in somewhere in the May to July timeframe. I remember that because I think one day, and we were in a small company working with founders and talk to a lot of people. You get very excited about something, and then they come back, and so you're going through these cycles of like excitement and maybe we're gonna get this, maybe something else come over, or doesn't happen, or happens later, or whatnot. So I think finally there was like one time in May or June where they're like, okay, we think we're gonna get it. I remember they were coming back from New York, meeting a VC, and it seemed like it was gonna work. And they told me, let's all meet in Cambridge. So I drove to Cambridge. They were coming from New York. We went out for drinks, and then it seemed like it was going to be real at the time. So that was really exciting. So I think we raised our seed round then, and then that's when we moved to a different location with a slightly bigger lab. And also at that time, then we had funds to build the team a little bit more and start operationalizing the vision that we had. And we'd made progress on the science as well. So
that may be 6 years ago, maybe, or
yes, it's actually almost 7 years ago.
7 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not here counting your gray hair or my gray hair. I remember meeting Brian about maybe 5 years ago, so 4 years ago, because he was one of the earliest instructors or guest speakers on our programs, and it was a different time altogether for the company, because I think at the time the company had barely closed the Series A of 90 million. Do I remember right? Or maybe it's
I think Series B was about 102 million.
Sorry, the Series A.
This was 2021. End of 2021 is when we closed the Series B.
There you go. So you went from co-working lab, if you like, three of you coming up with a plan, setting up the plan, then pitching in, getting it in front of investors. The guys secured the cash, and then the cash was in. And so
yes,
you were on a recruitment spree, if you like, or not. Did you try to keep it?
Yeah. So of course, if you guys spoke to Brian, you probably know this. I think we always had this philosophy of staying lean and bringing in only what we need.
Yeah.
I very much align with that philosophy. I think I would, of course, you want to resource appropriately, but I want to give more opportunities to people that I have versus just growing too fast, because there's a lot of small companies like that sort of grow to hundreds of people after the rounds. And I think that wasn't our vision for the company. And so we hired, I would say we were about 6-7 people by the end of 2018. So we hired 3 more people, or 2 more people, actually 3 more people that year. And then we also actually very early on, which is something we're very proud of, started a co-op program, which is basically getting co-op students from Northeastern University here in Boston who would spend 6 months at your company learning about the science and research, working in an industry environment.
Was that inspired by what you had done yourself at Genentech?
It was inspired by that. It was also, I'd always had a co-op. Even when I was at Alexion, I had a co-op. Even at my first company, OncoBiologics, I had 2 co-ops. There was actually a high school student in the lab as well. So I really like, as I mentioned earlier, like mentoring people. So we bought in our first co-op in the beginning of 2019, I want to say, or maybe 2019, yes. I think it was mid 2019 when we brought in. So we started working with the co-op program early 2019 and brought our first student in who did an amazing job, actually ended up hiring him as full-time employee who's still at the company. And since then, we have hired 3 co-op students as full-time employees in the last 6 years, and they're all still at the company. And we continue to do that. We actually have 2 students.
That's incredible. It's become your recruitment mechanism rather than...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's great because it gives you a chance to really get to know the person in a soft way, if you like. And then there is a matching of not only knowledge, because you are able to frame the learning process, but also of culture. So that's great. Nimish, I'm conscious of your time, and that there's so much that has happened since that moment. But it's always great to hear the genesis of any professional career, because really that's a key question: is that how did you get to where you're at today? And so if we were to talk about where you're at today, what does the organization look like? What's your day to day? How do you spend your time?
Yeah, it looks very different. We are, I think, 43 people now. We're a clinical stage company now. We have a drug that's in clinical trials for almost 2 years now in phase 1 for non-small cell lung cancer. This is something that we started working back in 2019, so the time that we were just talking about. But I think the company looks very different because I think personally for me, we're close to, or we're already doing what I always wanted to do, which is generating drugs that are helping patients. And we can see our lead drug doing that already. We'll be presenting more data at a medical meeting later this year. But the research team has grown quite a bit. My team is now about, I want to say 12, 13 people if you count the co-op, about 15 people there. So we do all the antibody engineering and the ADC generation, evaluating it in animal models, and generating the molecules that then basically, once you nominate a lead program, goes into our development team. So now we have a pretty well-formed development team. We have all different functions. So beyond research, we have clinical, we have regulatory, we have companion diagnostics. All of these different functions support the trial and help in patient selection. I would say that the culture has evolved, but the guiding principles of the culture still remain the same. I think we're very much still a very focused, very lean company for where we are at in the stage of the company. And I think the team really works very well together to accomplish everything that we need to do. We have a number of other programs as well now, in addition to the lead program. So we have a pipeline where we have multiple different projects in different types of cancer. And overall, I think we are functioning as an engine that's sort of starting projects, taking them to a certain point, taking them into development, bringing it to patients. It basically is what I've imagined early on what the company should look like. And we continue to grow as our program continues to help patients and we get other milestones at the company.
You had observed how the structure of the company should look like perhaps in your previous role. Did you replicate that, or did you reverse engineer certain pieces? Did you have mentors that helped you with that? How did you grow into that different role?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, of course, it's not just me, everyone else at the company and other leaders that we have hired over the time. I think we leverage expert consultants a lot. So we're very thoughtful about bringing in a function. We generally start with consultants because you may not need a full-time person for everything that you're working on. Yeah. So we heavily work with consultants at different stages of the company, because when our project was just getting into the clinic, the needs were different versus now when it's been in the clinic for about 2 years. So I had seen what I'd seen at previous companies, and those were, of course, much more established in the way that they already had products on the market. So those functions were slightly different. I would say we still have the same functions. They might not all be internal. We might leverage the same resources externally. And this is where being in the Boston area helps a lot, because there's a lot of people around. Yeah. Your network really helps you understand who could be an expert in this area, and you can reach out to them. And maybe you only need 2 hours a week worth of time from someone rather than having them full time.
I see. And do you enjoy this role of, in effect, coordinating highly technical or proficient individuals in their roles? But almost, is it more like project management rather than you going into the lab and doing it yourself like you did 7 years ago?
So my role specifically, I would say, as you described, is certainly a mix of both. So it's not all managing consultants. Within research, we actually have built a lot of the structure, a lot of it internally. We work with a lot of contract research organizations. So we do interact with them a lot. And I certainly enjoy that. I think there are challenges with that because CROs work with many different companies. How do you get them to think of your project as the most important project? And almost having them as an extension of your team is what we want to do. So there's a lot of management that goes into that. So we work very closely with them. And then there are other functions at the company where there may be only one person internally, but all of it is sort of outsourced and working with consultants. So they're pretty much doing that all the time. So my role, I'm managing the internal team as well, but then the team and myself are also working with a lot of these external contract research organizations.
I have a couple more questions just on this piece of your role and how the organization looks like. Perhaps the first question that came up in my mind is around using external providers like CROs and the rise of new technologies or other startups that are being built to make these processes more effective. And we mentioned Apoha and Shavit and Anshika, and the fact that you have been one of the founding testers of the technology that, as I understand it now from the last investor update, I don't want to share too much on this very recorded interview, but it seems to me like there is a process of integration now going through in terms of systems and adoption of the technology in your value chain.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I think we've been working with Apoha for a couple of years now, and we've really liked what we've seen, and we've generated more data on more samples. And I think where we are getting to internally is now integrating that maybe a little bit more closely with ongoing projects, because previously we were doing a lot of pet projects and trying to figure out how much sense it makes and how does it compare to things that we are already doing. But now using their technology almost as a sort of add-on to what we're doing already and running it in a live project where you could make decisions based on that data set. So that's where we're getting to. And I think it's really exciting because we've grown a lot in where Apoha was before and where they are now. And of course, they've made a lot of improvements and progress in their process and technology and platform. And we're leveraging all of that now. And I think it's the right time to start doing that with our projects.
But is it also part of your role to keep an eye out on whatever tool can help you achieve whatever milestone you need to achieve from a scientific perspective?
Very much. I think that's certainly, I go to a lot of conferences and I'm always keeping my eyes out for that because, again, as I mentioned early on, we very much want to be a very lean company, right? So, of course, we want to make sure then how can we be the most efficient and how can we be doing more with what we have. So technologies that allow you to do that are really something that are front and center of my mind. So I'm always scouting for things like that and looking for
what's exciting, or what are your hopes on for 2025?
Oh, wow. I think a lot to look forward to. Of course, like I mentioned, we have a program in the clinic and we'll be sharing some data on that at a medical meeting later this year. So that would be very exciting, sharing that with the world. We are very close to finalizing a candidate for our second program. So we'll be starting some IND enabling work. So that's work that prepares you eventually for a FDA submission. So that's very exciting as well for the company. And we will probably have more growth at the company this year as well to build more functions and see how we can continue to use this engine to generate more and more products. So I think those are exciting things for me in 2025.
So in effect, then from here, really it's validating that the engine works on a first asset.
Yes.
And that for you, going back then and say, okay, let's deploy the engine this way and that way.
Yeah.
And constantly doing this.
Yeah. And again, the other thing I would mention, which probably I didn't talk about earlier, is we're constantly also building and refining our technology. So our lead program has the first version, V1 of our technology, but now we're at V2 and certainly going towards V3. So there's a lot of excitement seeing how we can do more of what we do very well and build the technology and continue to apply that to programs and products.
Out of all the three experiences, you were super early stage, and then you were late stage Genentech. Then the other company that is perhaps you're about to come up to the stage that Alexion was at, maybe in a couple of years, or something like that. Fingers crossed, touch wood, and all of that. But out of all of the three stages, do you have a preferred one right now? Or are you in the ideal section of the venture biotech world at this stage?
Yeah, it's a great question, but it's also a difficult one because I would say I wouldn't be where I am today without all those experiences that I've had. And I would not change anything about them because I think I learned so much so that I could be where I am today. This certainly is a sweet spot for me because I'm at a company where I can continue to be in a sort of a smaller startup phase and continue to innovate, continue to work on new technologies and apply that to the products that I really like to do. And at the same time, the company is growing. So you have the opportunity to bring in more resources and build other things at the company. So at heart, I want to say I'm a builder. So like I like to build things. And that really resonates with me. Yeah, I certainly am at a sweet spot where I really like what I'm doing and I want to continue to do more of that.
It's quite rare actually for us to see from an investment perspective, many founders that have taken, if you like, the time to look, observe, and absorb. And a lot of the biotech founders that you meet today, they are barely finished their PhD. They are rushing into wanting to switch career, mainly because they've realized that academia is not for them or there is no real upside. And so they're rushing into incorporating, into raising micro seeds and spinning out patents that may make sense in the lab, but commercially they're not. It's just the beginning of a discovery process, and which is very exciting because it's a new mindset, a whole new mindset that has exploded really within universities. And but at the same time, as a firm specifically, we are always wary of very young researchers to jumping into entrepreneurship and taking your time and gaining more experience and exposure. But I'm wondering whether the process of setting up biotech companies is different than it was maybe 10 years ago. Today, because I don't know, AI, and because the ecosystem is more developed, there are more mentors like you around than there were perhaps 10 years ago. How do you feel about that in seeing ambitious youth coming through the entrepreneurial ranks?
I mean, I think it's very exciting. Of course, any attempt to try to bring a technology out to more people, I think the experience in itself is very rewarding and you learn a lot. And I think I'm excited to see that people want to do more of that because there's something to be said about learning from actually doing it, right? Until you do it, you don't learn it. And you gain so much experience just going out there and pitching your ideas and getting feedback on that and continue to refine that. So I think that's great. And I really like that. And I think from my perspective, being open and curious and then realizing that you may not know everything and that you could leverage experts outside that may have more experience in areas that you don't is super important. I think this is something we did really well at Mythic, where we were never afraid to seek out support and help and ask other people who may know more than us. So I think, again, I've never taken that route, but I can imagine, and I'm not saying everybody is like that, but from academia, people jumping directly into entrepreneurship, because the academia mindset, at least from where I sit, is very independent and you want to do everything yourself, right? So there could be a tendency to, I can do it, which is great, and I want to solve this, and maybe less reaching out and getting support and help from consultants or other experts out there. So I think if you put that in and if people do that efficiently, I think that could still be a very good route to building companies.
Yeah, which goes back to the point of the very reason why we set up Sandbox as a way of, in effect, offering free resources and making it as easy as possible for those that are still in academia to access exposures to testimonies like yours without seeing the process as a binary one of having to resign and having to jump into this. And I want to go back to perhaps closing with a last point, but I made a special note about this. You're stressing about teaching and giving back to the community. And when you say teaching, how do you mean that? You mean teaching science or teaching in terms of supporting and mentoring careers? What is it that is driving you there?
Yes, I think it's a little bit of both. So people management and mentoring is something that I really enjoy. Of course, I manage a big team here at Mythic.
Exactly.
I'm still fairly involved with my graduate school. So they have a mentorship program. And every year I have a mentee that I'm mentoring. So it's all virtual with Zoom. Yeah. So I'm involved with that. I do from time to time talk to other founders or startups, and just if someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn, because I owe so much to LinkedIn, I always take it. And there are sometimes people just trying to ask me about bispecifics or antibodies in general, or they read a paper that I wrote and they want to know more about it. And so I do that as well. When it comes to teaching, for the last almost 6 years now, I've been teaching this class on bispecific antibodies at a conference here in Boston. So this conference is organized by Cambridge Health Tech Institute. It's a protein engineering conference. So it happens in Boston in May and then in Europe in November. And I teach this class twice a year, both in Europe as well as in Boston. This is like a day before the conference, almost orienting people to the conference, like a workshop, so people can learn about the space. And then when they go into the conference, they have the background now to understand what they're looking for. So I've been doing that.
In a way, does that remind you a little bit of academia? Do you miss academia at all, or it's been so long that it's like a different chapter of your life?
So I do. So what I do love is interacting with students, because I think I can teach what I want to teach, but the questions that I get are different every time. And I really enjoy answering those and learning different perspectives. And I'm very much the kind of person that learns a lot through interacting with people and discussing with people. Like if you put me in a room, I'm not going to come up with a genius idea. Like I have to be able to do back and forth with people. So I really like interacting with students. So that's the part I would say I miss, but I'm always jumping around in the office talking to a lot of people. So continue to do that and try to do as much of that. And then in the Boston area, I try to network and meet with people over coffee and other things to try to do that. But yeah, that's the part I miss.
Thank you for sharing your journey. As a closing remark, I'm just trying to think, if you were to look back, and I've got a couple of thoughts myself around this point, but keen to hear yours. Is, do you think that anyone in academia could pursue this path, or is there a specific set of either mindset or skills that you were born with that one needs to focus on in order to get to this stage?
Yeah, it's actually a question one of my mentee asked me 2 days ago, actually. They were talking about the industry and what is different between academia and industry, and somewhat related to what you just said. I absolutely think anyone can do it. I think what you need to realize is that industry is going to be very different from academia. And I like to mention 2 things which are related. The first thing is, of course, you're going to have deadlines and timelines, and you have to stick to those. And you have to be very product focused to try to deliver a product in the end, right? Now, that might mean sometimes that you don't have the time or the ability to figure out why something did not work. So I think I was very good with moving on from things when they don't work. Some scientists cannot do that. They're very much, I need to figure this out, which is a great mindset. And I think we should do that as much as you can. But the highest priority still should be focusing on the product and the end goal and trying to do that. So I think if someone has that sort of mindset, then they'll do very well. And absolutely everybody can develop a mindset like that and be focused on that. But you have to be okay with timelines and delivering things at a certain time frame, and also moving on from things when they don't make sense for the company or for the product.
Wow, I've been working with scientists for a while now, and even within the team for a period, we were training scientists to become venture venture either analysts or helping us develop the product. And I always enjoyed the fact that there was always intense questioning about the why and breaking down the issue in a granular level and trying to really optimize things. And I think it was good at the beginning, almost when we were still in study mode about the thesis of the firm. But then eventually I realized that we needed to move faster than that kind of mindset. And I really saw a difference when we stopped doing that kind of, let's look back, let's try and solve that problem. But that's not the reason why we're here. Very interesting take on that, Nimish. Hey, I'll be in Boston. I'm in San Francisco. I'm at JPM next week. And then I'm in Texas the week after. And I'm in Boston the week after that one. So sometimes early February, I'm there. So let's go again for that ice cream. It'd be cold, but ice cream place we went to with the guides.
It's called Toscanini.
Yeah, exactly. It's Italian Indian. It's an Italian ice cream place, but it had an Indian flavor, if I remember.
Yes,
right.
It does. Yes.
Yeah. Actually, let's meet for that. But hey, thank you for your time today. This is great. And I know that the community will really enjoy this one. Where I see this sitting in particular is, in effect, it's almost like in the middle within our classic demography, because typically we have got very early stage scientist founders, and then it's between them to understand, okay, can I be the CEO or should I be in charge of the science and the CSO, but within a team of two? And then we've got plenty of accounts from those that are Genentech, and they're telling us what's their day-to-day basis in a big organization. But in the middle, that's a very fresh look, because it becomes very relevant for those that are already running a company and are working towards building something that you have with Brian. This is very precious.
Great. Thank you for having me. And I'm always happy to network with people. So they should reach out to me on LinkedIn if they want to.
LinkedIn is the. I wonder whether Brian allowed every time that he sees you on LinkedIn. Every time he goes on LinkedIn, he manages to move somewhere else. But I know that this is no longer the case.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
Great story. Thank you for this, and see you soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Ciao.